under the expression equality before law. You may think that rules should be applied to everyone and in the same way. But what happens when general rules clash with a person's religious beliefs? What about if they couldn't receive certain benefits that others enjoy? For example, a student that must keep the Sabbath because of his religious convictions, and the entrance examination to university always falls on that day. Is it fair to apply the general rule equally in every case, even though that could mean that that student will never be able to enroll? For situations like this, there is a legal tool called reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is the legal duty to make the necessary exceptions so that everyone can enjoy the same rights regardless of their religious beliefs. These accommodations could mean, for example, shifting schedules, changing tasks or functions, or allowing modifications to the uniform. The result of reasonable accommodation is removing the conflict between general rules and religious beliefs. This way, reasonable accommodation allows people to follow general rules without being forced to act against their convictions. This tool is particularly useful for members of religious minorities who have different beliefs and practices. Some of them could seem strange to the majority. Obviously, reasonable accommodation must follow real needs and not just simple whims. That's why a person that requests an accommodation must prove the sincerity of his beliefs. It must be remembered that even though a person is completely free to adopt a religion or not, or to change religions, once a person adopts certain religious beliefs, it's going to be his conscience who prevents him to act against those beliefs. In other words, a person can decide what to believe in, but cannot decide to act against those beliefs. Of course, the duty of accommodation cannot be limitless. That's why it is called reasonable accommodation. Among others, those limits could be the actual possibility of providing the necessary adjustments and the fact that those exceptions don't generate an undue hardship. It is important to understand that reasonable accommodation is not a privilege for a person that has religious beliefs. On the contrary, it implies treating cases differently so that all people from all religions can receive the same opportunities and conditions.